Jack and Jill are happily living in the real world. One day, Jack takes Jill to watch a film. The film they see is The Matrix. Now, Jack and Jill have the tendency to philosophize, and a film like The Matrix was certainly going to give them something to talk about. "You know," said Jill, "I know it was only a film, but when you think about it, we could be living in The Matrix too." "That's right," replied Jack. "For example, in reality, there is no such thing as colour. It only exists in our subjective experience." "That's true," said Jill. "We also never really see each other either. Light bounces off your face, gets focused by the lens in my eye, it hits the optic nerve at the back of my eye, which then sends an electrical signal to my brain. This signal is interpreted by my brain and processed as information. This information is then generated as my own mental picture of your face. But in reality, there is nothing of you that I am actually seeing. I only ever see, or know, my own mental pictures." To which Jack responds, "Yes, and the same goes for the other senses, such as sound, smell, and even touch. That tree over there feels hard, but in reality it's made of atoms, with vast empty spaces between its particles. The image and feel of a tree is just my perception. It is just a percept in my own consciousness. What the reality is, independent of my consciousness, I cannot ever know or experience." At this point, Rudolf Steiner comes along. He has overheard their conversation and decides to chime in. He starts by recapitulating what they have said so far. "Indeed," he says, "the naive man regards his percepts, such as they appear to his immediate apprehension, as things having an existence wholly independent of him. When he sees a tree, he believes in the first instance that it stands in the form in which he sees it, with the colours of its various parts and so on, there on the spot towards which his gaze is directed. When this same man sees the sun in the morning appear as a disk on the horizon and follows the course of this disk, he believes that all this actually exists and happens just as he observes it. However, as you have both pointed out, physics, physiology, and psychology seem to teach us that for our percepts, our organisation is necessary, and that therefore we cannot know anything about external objects except what our organisation transmits to us. Our percepts are thus modifications of our organisation, not things in themselves." "The Matrix!" cries Jack. Steiner continues, "It would be hard to find in the history of human culture an edifice of thought which has been built up with great ingenuity, and yet, on closer analysis, collapses into nothing." "What do you mean?" says Jill. "Hitherto," continues Steiner, "we have been dealing with something, the external percept, of which, from our naive standpoint, we have had up until now a completely wrong conception. We thought that the percept, just as we perceived it, had objective existence. But now we observe it disappears together with our mental picture. Have we, then, any right at all to start from it with our arguments? We must henceforth treat the tree, of which we believed that it acted on us and produced a mental picture of itself in us, as itself a mental picture. But from this it follows logically that our sense organs and the processes in them are also merely subjective. We have no right to speak of a real I, but only of our mental picture of an I. Exactly the same is true for the nerve paths and the brain processes. As soon as we see clearly that our sense organs and their activity, our nerve and brain processes, can also be known to us only through perception, the train of thought which we have outlined reveals itself in its full absurdity. It is quite true that I can have no percept without the corresponding sense organ. For example, if I don't have an eye, then I don't see any colour. But just as little can I be aware of a sense organ without perception. This whole idea can refute naive realism only by itself assuming, in naive realistic fashion, that one's own organism has objective existence. It is totally unfit to make the distinction between what happens to the percept in the process of perception and what must be inherent in the percept prior to perception. We must therefore tackle this problem in another way.